Good afternoon. I did my article review on an article entitled Using Anticipatory Reading Guides to Improve Elementary Students' Comprehension. This article was all about how to use anticipatory guides in your classroom, and it gave lots of different steps on how to do that. So I'm just going to go through parts of it and just kind of explain how to use them, and even a example of how they were used and how they were tested to see if these were actually effective in the classroom or not. So these students today are just required to comprehend what they're reading on so many different levels. They're required to answer questions about it, reflect, predict, and so there's so many different aspects to comprehension. It's much harder for students to comprehend today in 2014 than it was when I was in elementary school, 10, 12 years ago. So a lot of students, their expectations have been raised tremendously, and so they're not testing as well, they're not doing as well in class, and so they're being labeled as, just lower level students, when in actuality they're just struggling with comprehension. And if they had the skills to do comprehension and understand what comprehension means and how to do that, there wouldn't be as many issues with students being placed, tier 2, tier 2, tier 3 students. And so teachers are using more and more methods of reading comprehension for students, such as anticipatory guides and predicting and using think mapping and all this kind of stuff, so that students are better understanding what they're reading, what it means, and how to apply it to their tests that they're taking and just everyday life. One thing this article brought out, which I thought was very interesting, it had a lot of charts and stuff in it, and it said that students who were of diverse backgrounds struggled more with reading comprehension. And I think this is interesting to bring up because you are going to have, ELL students or just students who come from a lower income family who are struggling in your classroom, and it may just be because if they're ELL, they don't understand at all because they're just learning English, and their first language is very different from English, and so they're struggling more to understand and comprehend what they're reading, whereas their reading comprehension in their first language may be, phenomenal, out of this world, but in English it's lower. Or students who come from a low economic background who don't have the help they need at home, and so they're not learning as much and they're not comprehending, and maybe their parents aren't good readers, and so they're not modeling that at home, and so these students are struggling more and more and more in class. One thing it brought up was something called explicit teaching. This is a systematic method for presenting material in small steps, pausing to check for understanding and eliciting active and successful participation from all students. And so what this means is basically teaching, stopping, asking questions, making sure the students understand what you've taught so far, picking back up, stopping again, making sure they remember what you taught and ask questions about from the beginning, then this next section that you've added, and keep going and going and stopping and going and stopping and going, and ensuring that your students are fully understanding what they're being asked. It also goes into just really explaining what reading comprehension is and how important it is for students in their classrooms to have good reading comprehension skills, because it affects every single subject. It doesn't just affect English language arts. It affects social studies, it affects science, it affects math. If they're not understanding what a question says on a test, how are they going to do well? And so it just continues to go on talking about that. It said that many students are experiencing trouble reading, like I said before. A lot of the ELL students, or just students who have some sort of label on them, are struggling more and more. And so because they don't have that background, that foundation for comprehension, they just have, XYZ, I don't even know. They don't have any background for comprehension, and so when they're taking tests, when they're reading material in class, they're just reading it to say they've done it. They're not actually getting what it's saying. This goes on and it talks specifically about anticipatory guides. I think this was interesting because we actually used them in our class for a long walk to water. And so basically what an anticipatory guide is that it's pre-questions before you read, and then after you've read, you answer the question again. They've been shown in true-false format, where you'll choose true-false before reading, and then you'll choose true-false after you've read. They're also been done with predicting, so you'll just look at what you read in the previous chapter and predict what you think the next chapter is going to be about. And then at the end, you'll say whether or not your prediction was accurate, or if something else happened that was important in that chapter. I think this is a very unique and cool and new way for students to comprehend what they're reading, and for us as teachers to ensure that they are comprehending what they are reading. This article went through and talked with a class of third graders from Texas, and they actually did this over a period of time, and they were trying to prove if anticipatory guides were effective in the classroom. And a lot of the things that they discussed was that the teacher had to continuously be on the students to do the anticipatory guides, which is interesting because that's kind of like what Dr. White has done with us. A lot of us have not been completing those anticipatory guides, and so it kind of defeats the purpose of what they're there for. And so the teachers in this study were having to continually remind their students, hey, are you doing this? Hey, are you doing this? Hey, are you doing this? And when they actually were doing their anticipatory guides, the students were doing so much better. But when they weren't, they were struggling, and they weren't actually getting what was happening. And they even looked to see if, without the teacher saying anything about them doing the anticipatory guide, if they would do it. And many of the students were not. There was only a couple that would actually do it. And so I thought that was interesting, and it kind of reflects what we've actually seen in our own classroom of college students. So I really think using anticipatory guides is a great way for us as teachers to ensure that our students are learning what they're supposed to be learning, are getting everything they're supposed to be getting out of reading material, and actually are comprehending what they've read. And I think it's a good way for us, or a good thing for us to continue to use. And it's definitely something that I will use in my classroom in the future for just various reading, regardless of if I am teaching language arts or social studies or science or math or whatever I'm teaching. These can be used. It's not just for one subject, which I think is really cool. And so that's basically all that my article was really about. It was a really good article. It was cool because it connected what we've been learning in class to a real world aspect. And so I hope you enjoyed this. Have a good day.